whereas sometimes I'm questioning myself whether it is for you, for the not person of you. How is it in the daily living, in this, to be in the seemingly acting role during daily life? Do you is it also for you that there is in and out, or that you are aware of playing the role, or how can you describe it?
No, I mean, no one can describe it. There's no in and out. How is it? The thing is, I've talked to others about this as well. I had a conversation with Tony Parsons about this. It's difficult to remember. I mean, in the story of time, in which there is a past, and there's past experience, and there is present experience, I think this is common anyway for everyone. You know, it's really difficult to remember in a kind of meaningful way, by which I mean a kind of emotionally experiential way. I'm not talking about just biographical memory. Oh, I remember that 3 years ago I lived in London. It's not that, but you know, kind of sensed way. It's just really difficult to remember. In the story of a character who lives in time, how things were. So how things are becomes normal. So I talked about earlier, for example, the immense shock that there can be in just a split second of awakening. More revolutionary for the one who thought they were a person than anything that has ever, more shocking probably than anything that has ever happened in their apparent life before. And then there might be the full seeing, you know, the seeing of fullness, whatever. Wow. You ask people what that's like. They may say all sorts of things, but one of the things that they might say is, well, it's just wow. Wow. But then everything becomes normal. You know, that becomes there's this phrase, isn't there, the new normal. That becomes the new normal. It's very, very difficult to get a sense, an experiential sense of how things were. So it's just normal. There's a very good Zen expression, a Zen saying which explains, I mean, there's so much really good stuff in Zen. At first mountains are mountains, then mountains are no longer mountains, then mountains are mountains again. What does that mean? At first everything's just normality. Mountains are just not mountains. Mountains, you know, I've lived with mountains all my life. I was born in Switzerland. Sorry, that's not a true biographical statement about me. That's just an example of what somebody might say. Well, of course, mountains are just mountains. I live with them every day of my life. Right? And probably part of mountains being mountains, which is never thought about because it's lived experientially every day of my life, is mountains are kind of pretty solid, aren't they? They're three-dimensional. I mean, you can bang pegs into them and tie ropes to them and climb up to them, and the pegs don't fall out, so they must be pretty solid. So mountains are just mountains. Then mountains are no longer mountains. That's a description of how mountains may be perceived, even in a split second of awakening. Or when liberation is seen in its fullness. Like, wow! They're not solid after all. Mountains aren't three-dimensional. Nothing's three-dimensional. Mountains are two-dimensional. They're flimsy. Everything is so flimsy. It's just like a projection onto the thinnest piece of gauze you could possibly imagine. Wow! So that's the second phase, pretending there are phases, that is meant in that Zen saying. So first mountains are just ordinary. Then mountains are not mountains. There's something absolutely extraordinary and then mountains and mountains again. In other words, the extraordinary becomes the ordinary. The extraordinary becomes the new normal. So it's very difficult, not just for me, I know others I've talked to this, it's very difficult to give a description of how things are, if you like, because of course it's normal. And also, of course, there are no rules. There are no rules about how things might be. But there is a tendency, and that tendency is at the very least there'll probably be some more relaxation. I keep coming back to relaxation and therefore Buddhahood. There's likely to be at least some relaxation. There's likely to be a reduction in neurosis. Doesn't necessarily mean all neurotic impulse will disappear, but there's likely to be a reduction in neurosis. Now, if neurotic impulses do remain, there's still no comparison, because a neurotic impulse arising for a person is completely different to a neurotic impulse arising when the person has been seen through. Because a neurotic impulse arising in the first place has a person to cling to. It would be all sticky. A neurotic impulse arising when the person has been seen through, there's nothing for it to cling to. So the neurotic impulse might arise, it's probably likely to die away again pretty quickly. And then also, again, stressing very much there are no rules, nevertheless here, and in some other individuals I've talked to about this, there are certain impulses or feelings which simply don't arise anymore. That doesn't mean that they could not arise. Of course they could, but as a matter of fact they don't. And I used to say, well, there's two of them, and that's boredom and depression. So boredom doesn't happen here, depression doesn't happen here, boredom doesn't happen in other cases, depression doesn't happen in other cases where I've shared about this. I know someone for whom something they didn't understand happened, and they said that to me. They said, Richard, I don't understand what happened. All I can tell you is I don't feel depressed anymore. So I used to say that boredom and depression are the two things that could arise, can arise, but as a matter of fact don't arise. Now since then, when somebody said something to me and it kind of went, oh, I hadn't thought of that. They said, do you ever feel nostalgic? No. So nostalgia doesn't arise either. Nostalgia, a kind of sort of emotional entanglement involving regret maybe with the past. No, nostalgia doesn't arise. That hadn't even occurred to me. It's just somebody asked me that question. No, nostalgia hasn't been known here for years and years and years. And then that made me think, well, there's probably other feelings that don't arise anymore. It's just, because they don't arise, I don't think about them. Could nostalgia arise? Of course it could. Could depression arise? Of course it could. Could depression arise? Of course it could, because anything's possible, but as a matter of fact, it doesn't arise. And I'm not talking about just here, I'm talking about, like there and there and there with other individuals I've talked to. But beyond that, it's very difficult to say. It's one thing I would say is what we're talking about, it's very undramatic. It's very ordinary. It's much less dramatic because neurosis is really good at creating drama. Surely we've all noticed that. Surely everybody in this room at least knows at least one person who's quite neurotic. So neurosis creates a huge amount of drama. So if there's less neurosis, there's likely to be less drama. So everything just becomes a bit more even. It's not very exciting in a way. If for excitement we think, well, what's exciting? Well, I know what's exciting for me. What's really exciting for me is getting on a plane to fly to India and trekking into the Himalayas so that I can sit with my guru and learn some new mantras for a month. That's really exciting. Well, if that's what we find exciting, it's likely to happen less often. So it's not very exciting. It's really ordinary.
Thank you. And also I heard sometimes Tony telling always that it's just so ordinary.
Yeah.
And I'm just...
Extraordinarily ordinary.
Yeah. And here I say I sometimes like watching my life from the first glimpse of looking into this, that there is emptiness, and then sometimes I thought that it was it, but it never was it. It always came back, and but in the moment there is such a clarity or something strong or intense. It really feels like it's possible to be addicted after it. What you mentioned before, that is felt good.
Addicted into what?
To this, like a condition or Zustand. Condition. So there are some times, for example, I watch a video from this, what your October video was on YouTube. Yeah, then it happened that afterwards it was like there was nobody watching it.
Yeah.
And it was like all one. And then it's back again into the old drama. And then I sometimes feel like addiction, watch it again, it will not happen again, you know? So, I mean, it's in and out, and always is it or not, and oh my God.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I want an answer from outside, but if there is no in and outside, how can I have an answer? So it's in a way ridiculous, and also I wanted to express it, so I don't know, it's also not a question. There is sometimes a part here which wanted to know whether there will come some more or not. Some more
It's natural.
relaxation, some more whatever.
That's just absolutely natural in the sense that that is the nature of the mind. Of course. And you mentioned Tony describing this as very ordinary. Tony's wife, Claire, describes this as seeing this as a gentle wow. Gentle wow. I love that. It's a wow, but it's a kind of gentle wow. It's not dramatic. That first dropping away of the person that may occur, doesn't have to, but may occur, that first maybe just split second awakening, that can be very, very dramatic. But seeing this in its fullness, it's not dramatic, no, it's a gentle wow.
Sorry, because my English is not very good, but I will try.
It's better than my German.
Maybe, yes.
Definitely.
I was talking during the break with Tom, and she said maybe I can ask you. And last autumn I had an experience And after this experience, it was a very long time that I felt free, really free. And all sides, up, down, free. A lot of something like space. I experienced something like space. And I am so limited now, and I'm so sad, really sad about it.
Mm.
I don't understand why again. I mean, maybe there is nothing to understand.
What does limitation feel like?
Yes, it's really horrible because there is such a longing.
Yeah.
And not understanding. I am unlimited. I know this, and I am not. And this makes me something like crazy.
Mm.
And also sad. I mean, I do my things, I do my job, I do my duty. I try to go in for a reflection, but I see that the things, like you said, a drama. The things are.
Stick.
Ja, I am.
It's close to what comes to me.
Yes. The things, they are very close, they come to me, and and I go in reaction, and it takes always a bit time that I can go out of these reactions, similar like before this experience. And I'm very sad about it.
There's sort of lots of reaction, lots of emotional reaction.
Yes. Everything came again.
Yeah.
Maybe not in this longness, and not in this game of dramatic. It's not, but I am limited, and this I can feel very strong.
Mm. It's not an uncommon story. I mean, there are others for whom it's like that. I mean, this can certainly sometimes be an opening, and then it's like an opening into being, and then a going back into the me. And that can happen repeatedly. Sometimes, and I have no idea if this is the case with you, I have no idea, but sometimes what happens, if there's a kind of sudden and very complete kind of opening, so there is this total loss of what I call both contraction and localization. So by contraction, I mean that kind of release from the sense of separation, from the sense of being a separate person. Right? By localization, what I mean is that often in an awakening event or a liberation event, there is also a complete loss of any sense of this even physically existing in what we could call space-time. Right? So there is, I mean, it's impossible to describe, but it's that reveals that there is no space, there is no here or there. How can there be a here and a there when awareness isn't focused here in this little physical frame, when awareness is focused everywhere? I mean, I'm not saying the walls are aware in any sense that we could make sense of, but awareness is just as much in the walls as it may be in what appears to be this brain or this head. There's complete loss, not just of that sense of contraction, but also of localization. Now that loss of a sense of localization, that, it seems to me, always ends. In other words, there's always a return to a sense of being located somehow in a kind of physical space-time. It may not be in the same way, it may not be to the same degree, but I'm saying it always happens, that there's a return to that physical localization. I can't know that it always happens, it's just I haven't come across a case where it doesn't. So let's say it probably always happens, this return to localization. What doesn't happen, if there's been that final seeing, is a return into the state of contraction, the state of separation. Right? They're kind of different things. The state of contraction and the state of localization, if you like, they're different things. talking to some individuals, I get the feeling, and I can't possibly know, but I just get the impression that sometimes what happens is there is this complete opening and seeing this loss of contraction and this loss of localization. And it's, you know, it's not an experience, it's not a state, and yet if we're going to talk about it in words, it is lovely, it is wonderful. And then what can happen is that when the sense of localization comes back, there can be a disappointment. And it can feel like something very special has ended and something has been lost. And the mind's always looking for a way. The mind, which does not exist, is always looking for a way to get us back on the wheel of becoming, the hamster wheel. The wheel that looks like a path but is actually a wheel. So the mind is always looking for a way to come back in and say, come on, there's still work to do, there's still a job to do, there's still a goal to reach, and if you follow me, I can get you there. Just do what I say, and I can get you there. Okay, you thought you had it, you thought that was it, you thought you'd reached the goal, but just one more visit to the Guru in the Himalayas. You know, just one more year of spiritual psychotherapy. You know, just one more €5,000 payment on Diksha at the Meditation University in India. Well, one more mantra to go. And I'll get you there. The mind is always waiting for an opportunity to get back into the managing director's chair. And I just think, you know, sometimes that's that's what happens. I'm not saying that's what's happened for you. I can't possibly know. But sometimes I speak to people and I think, well, what's happened? That's what's happened. And all that. The only impediment, I use that word impediment, the only impediment is kind of a thought that goes, and I mean, I hope this is the only way I can express it, I hope you understand. The only impediment sometimes that's left is, well, if this is it, it's not good enough. It should be better than this. Because when there was that explosion out of contraction into total openness, total non-localization, it was wonderful. I mean, it beats every drug you could ever think of into a cocked hat, as we say. It's just so wonderful. And then, and there's inevitably the return to localization, it's just ordinary. And so the mind can get hold of that memory and it can go, well, there you go, you've lost something. And if this is it, it's not good enough. It should always, in the story of time, it should always be like that, blissed out, unbelievably blissed out. It's so wonderful. It's never like that. I say it's never like that. I've never met anybody that it's always like that for. I've never read anyone it's always like that for. Maybe it is always like that for, in a few cases. You never hear from them because they're sitting somewhere blissed out. Who cares? So I don't know. I don't know what's happening for you. But sometimes that's what's happening. And sometimes all that's needed, well, nothing's needed, but in a way, all that's needed is for the individual to hear that. And they go, oh yes. And that thought falls away, and that's it.
You think it's only a conception in your mind?
Well, that thought is, but this, you see, what can go on, I mean, also, anything can still go on, even when this has been seen in its entirety. Emotions can come up. In fact, emotions and feelings can come up very, very much more strongly than before because they're uninhibited by neurosis. The less neurosis there is in this psychophysical system, the more powerfully emotions are likely to be felt when they come up.
The only difference I feel now is that the emotions, they are coming that are coming, that they are going much more soon.
That's it.
Away.
That's it. That was the other thing.
Only different.
Well, the other thing I was going to say. So emotions are likely to come up much more powerfully and be over much more quickly.
Yes.
Because the other thing that neurosis does is it makes emotion hang around. Hang around. It makes emotion last a long time. So without a lot of neurosis, there might be a flash of anger and it's gone. With a lot of neurosis, there might be 5 hours of irritation instead. As I say, I can't know what's going on with you, but I know that sometimes happens. You know, the mind comes in, it says, well, if this is it, it should be better than this. There shouldn't be any possibility of feeling sad, of feeling fearful, of feeling angry. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. I mean, you'll find plenty of people out there, writers and speakers, who will say that. Oh, I have gone beyond all emotion until there is no possibility of anger or fear or sorrow. There is complete enlightenment. I have gone there. I am immovable. It's rubbish. And if I ever come across that, my immediate thought is, well, just wait and see. It's a kind of a claim. I mean, you know, there are these claims. It's a kind of claim. There are these claims frequently made, and the claim is, the way to sum it up is imperturbability. I am in a state of imperturbability. Nothing moves me. Nothing reaches me. I have gone beyond that merely human phase into the divine. And once you have reached the point of imperturbability, it is eternal, it is permanent. To which the only thing to say is, just you wait. Wait and see. You think you're imperturbable? Well, wait and see. Maybe in the coffee bar tomorrow morning some Fraulein comes in and says good morning to you and you fall in love. You see how imperturbable you'll be then. But the mind, certain minds love that kind of story. Yes, it offers a place of such safety, doesn't it? Oh, imperturbability. No chance of sorrow again, no chance of anger again, no chance of fear again, and no chance of falling in love again either. Isn't that sad? There's a Greek, I think it was a Stoic, one of the Stoics, the Greek Stoics, wasn't it? This wonderful saying. It's kind of not quite relevant to what I'm saying, but it's almost relevant to it, and I absolutely love it. Call no man happy until he is dead. In other words, we don't know what's round the next corner. I mean, the Stoics also valued imperturbability. I mean, in a sense, the Stoics, that was the only thing they valued. What was the whole purpose of Stoic philosophy and the whole purpose of the Stoic way of life? It was to achieve a state of imperturbability. I mean, I love the Stoics in some ways. I mean, the Stoics are becoming extremely fashionable again. I mean, I don't know about in Germany, but in England, the fastest growing, the most popular form of psychotherapy at the moment is cognitive behavioural therapy, which is entirely based on Stoic philosophy. And it's lovely and it's wonderful. And that sort of thing about imperturbability, it's great in a way, but it's also very incomplete.
Maybe you just need to explain imperturbability because it's a long word.
Imperturbability, a state in which, a state of kind of rock-like emotional stability in which nothing can affect or shake. You got it? A state of emotional stability which nothing can disturb. A bus hitting you could not disturb it. And I've referred to falling in love, and of course falling in love is sometimes very much like a bus hitting you. So the Greeks say, the Stoics say, call no man happy until he is dead. In other words, you just don't know. Just don't know what's coming along around the corner. So there can be the absolute, total, complete, utter seeing of this, whatever the hell that means. The absolute seeing of this, nothing more possibly to see. And there can be perturbation. There can be emotional perturbation. And what's more, it's likely to be a lot more powerful than before. Because neurosis, personal neurosis, it's great for making emotional perturbation less powerful. But it's great also for making it go on for a lot longer. So instead of a flash of anger, there's maybe months of irritation. Instead of a flash of fear, there's days of anxiety. And that's what neurosis does. That's what happens for the neurotic person. So in the seeing of this, stronger feelings, not weaker. And that includes all feelings, including the feelings that we might consider to be uncomfortable. There's no escape from that. Every suggestion of escape from that is just a dream. Well, of course there are escapes from that. I can think of two of them immediately. One's called heroin, the other one's called suicide.
What's the first one?
One's called heroin, and the other's called suicide. But if we don't want either heroin or suicide, there's no escape from that possibility. The idea, the offer that some gurus will make of a state of constant bliss with no possibility of disturbance, it's fake. And the guru himself or herself might not know that it's fake, because the guru himself or herself might have been in a state of imperturbability for 10 years. Well, you wait for 10 years and one day and see what happens. There's a lovely story about Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the transcendental meditation master, which I should not tell now because this is being recorded on camera, but I will tell it nevertheless. I don't know if it's true, I have no idea, so I can tell it in that spirit. It's the sort of story that I hope is true because I think it's utterly charming. I started off my kind of spiritual search with transcendental meditation. I didn't do it for very long, but I loved it, and I really kind of always liked Maharishi. It's lovely, giggling, Well, the story is that he fell in love with an American woman. Now, I don't know if the American woman that he fell in love with was Mia Farrow, the actress. Some people say it was Mia Farrow, and I hope it was, because Mia Farrow, I think she was there with Maharishi at the same time the Beatles were. So I kind of hope that it was Mia Farrow, because it makes a better story. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a different, beautiful, blonde American young woman. Anyway, the story is that Maharishi fell in love with her, and he virtually had a nervous breakdown. Partly because the beautiful, blonde, young American woman didn't fall in love with him, and partly because he was so conflicted because of this role that he'd been given in life, that he was this sort of monk-like celibate figure who was at the head of this enormous money-making operation. It wasn't that big back in those days, but nevertheless, then quite large money-making organisation, and to become gigantic money-making organisation. I have no idea if that story is true, but like quite a lot of the stories I tell, I hope it's true. I like it. It's something very sweet about it, that Maharishi would fall in love with Mia Farrow and be so conflicted by that in his position that he'd virtually have a nervous breakdown. Now, as an exemplar of imperturbability, you know, who could be a better model than Maharishi? Oh, everything is so beautiful, always there with his flower and his little giggle. But the little giggle isn't, you know, it's not a hysterical giggle. It is the giggle of a man who is imperturbable, who has gone beyond life's sorrows until he meets Mia Farrow. As I say, I can't, as we say in English, I cannot stand that story up. I can't promise that it's true, but I hope that it's true. I just think it's a lovely story. I'll just throw in another couple of lines as well. There's the anecdote from Zen. The Zen master who says to the student, "Why do you want enlightenment? How do you know you'd like it?" I think that says a lot. That really says a lot. If we're out there on some kind of spiritual trip about some blissful state, we should listen to that little Zen anecdote. And then there's another Zen master, I think it was a Korean Zen master, who said, "No one knows sorrow like a Zen master." You might say, well, why not? Why not? Well, probably because the Zen master's free of neurosis. So when they experience sorrow, they really experience sorrow in its fullness, and anger, and joy. Time for biscuits. Time for biscuits and coffee. Chocolate biscuits.